King Edward VII was the King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland from 1901 until his death in 1910. He was born in 1841, the eldest son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. His reign was marked by significant social and political changes, including the introduction of the first Labour government and the passing of the Parliament Act, which curtailed the power of the House of Lords. However, his reign was cut short by his sudden and shocking death on May 6, 1910, at the age of 68. The king had been in poor health for several years, suffering from various ailments, including bronchitis, gout, and obesity. His death was caused by a series of heart attacks, which ultimately proved fatal. The news of the king's death was met with widespread shock and grief throughout the United Kingdom and the rest of the world. He had been a popular and well-respected monarch, known for his affable personality and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. His death was seen as a great loss, not only to the royal family but to the nation as a whole. The king's funeral was held on May 20, 1910, and was a grand and solemn affair, attended by dignitaries and representatives from all over the world. The funeral procession, which included members of the royal family, government officials, and military personnel, made its way through the streets of London to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, where the king was laid to rest. The death of King Edward VII marked the end of an era in British history. He had been a bridge between the Victorian era and the modern age, and his reign had seen significant changes in British society and politics. His passing left a void that would not be filled until the coronation of his son, King George V, later that year. King Edward VII, also known as Albert Edward, was the king of the United Kingdom and the British Dominions from January 22, 1901, until his death on May 6, 1910. He was the eldest son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and he ascended to the throne following his mother's death. King Edward VII was a popular monarch, known for his charm, wit, and love of socializing. His reign was marked by a period of peace and prosperity, and he played an important role in strengthening relations between the United Kingdom and other countries. However, on May 6, 1910, King Edward VII's sudden death shocked the world. He had been in poor health for some time, suffering from bronchitis, pneumonia, and other ailments. Despite this, his death still came as a surprise, as he had been seen in public just a few days before, attending the funeral of a friend. The news of King Edward VI's passing was met with widespread grief and mourning across the United Kingdom and the world. Flags were flown at half-mast, and many businesses closed as a sign of respect. His funeral was attended by representatives from all over the world, including European monarchs, diplomats, and other dignitaries. The unexpected passing of King Edward VII had significant implications for the British monarchy and the country as a whole. His son, George V, succeeded him as king, and the transition was largely smooth. However, there were concerns about the future of the monarchy, as King Edward VII had been a popular and charismatic figure who had helped to modernize the institution. His death marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. However, the world was stunned by the tragic news of his untimely demise on May 6, 1910, at the age of 68. The king had been in poor health for some time, suffering from a number of ailments, including bronchitis and pneumonia. In the days leading up to his death, his condition had worsened, and he had become increasingly weak. Despite his poor health, the king had continued to carry out his duties as monarch. In fact, he had just returned from a state visit to France, where he had been warmly received by the French people. Upon his return to England, he had attended a number of public events, including a military parade, where he had inspected the troops. On the evening of May 6, 1910, the king retired to his bedroom at Buckingham Palace, feeling exhausted and unwell. He was attended by his physician, Sir James Reed, and his personal physician, Dr. Frederick Treves. The two doctors did everything they could to ease the king's suffering, but it was clear that he was rapidly deteriorating. At around 11:45 p.m., the king's condition took a sudden turn for the worse, and he lost consciousness. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, he passed away at 11:30 a.m. the following morning. The news of his death sent shockwaves around the world, and people from all walks of life mourned the loss of this beloved monarch. The death of King Edward VII was a tragic event that stunned the world. He had been a popular and well-respected monarch, and his passing was felt deeply by people across the globe. His legacy, however, lived on, and he remains one of the most celebrated kings in British history. The events leading up to King Edward VII's death began in late April 1910, when he fell ill with bronchitis. His illness was initially not considered serious, and he continued to carry out his official duties as much as possible. However, his condition soon deteriorated, and he developed pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, he died on the evening of May 6, 1910, at Buckingham Palace. The suddenness of King Edward VII's death and the conflicting reports surrounding his illness and treatment led to many questions and rumors. One of the main controversies was the role of his physician, Sir Francis Laking, in his treatment. Some reports suggested that Sir Laking had been negligent in his treatment of the king and that this had contributed to his death. However, an official inquiry later cleared Sir Laking of any wrongdoing. Another mystery surrounding King Edward VI's death was the precise cause of his illness. Some reports suggested that he had contracted the disease while on a trip to the Mediterranean, while others speculated that he had been exposed to the illness during his attendance at the wedding of his nephew, Prince Arthur of Connaught, in Germany. Some even suggested that he had been poisoned. However, the most likely cause of King Edward VII's death was a combination of factors, including his advanced age. He was 68 at the time of his death, his history of heavy smoking and drinking, and the stress of his official duties as king. It is also possible that his bronchitis had weakened his immune system, leaving him more vulnerable to pneumonia. In the aftermath of King Edward VI's death, there was a great outpouring of grief from the British public and people around the world. He was widely regarded as a popular and charismatic monarch who had helped to modernize and reform the British monarchy. His death also marked the end of an era, as he was the last British monarch to be part of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, as his successor, King George V, changed the name of the royal house to the House of Windsor in response to anti-German sentiment during World War I. Edward's reign was marked by many joyous celebrations, including his coronation in 1902, which was attended by thousands of people from around the world. He was known for his charm, wit, and love of life, and he was often seen in public with his wife, Queen Alexandra, and their children, who were also popular with the British people. However, the joyous celebrations of Edward's reign came to an abrupt end on May 6, 1910, when he died at the age of 68. The news of his death was met with shock and grief around the world, as people mourned the loss of a beloved monarch who had presided over a time of relative peace and prosperity in Britain. Edward's sudden death was a blow to the country, which had grown accustomed to his leadership and his personality. His funeral was a somber and solemn affair, attended by dignitaries from around the world, including many European monarchs. The streets of London were lined with mourners, who watched as the procession made its way to St. George Chapel at Windsor Castle, where Edward was buried. The end of Edward's reign also marked the beginning of a new era in British history. His successor, King George V, would go on to lead the country through the tumultuous years of World War I and the aftermath of the conflict. In conclusion, the abrupt end to King Edward VI's reign was a moment of profound sadness for the British people and for the world. His death marked the end of an era of joyous celebrations and marked the beginning of a new era of mourning and uncertainty. Nevertheless, Edward's legacy endured, as his reign left an indelible mark on British history and on the hearts of those who loved him. So that's it for today. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell button to get all the latest updates.